Now, World Day of Social Justice highlights the dire need to tackle socio-economic issues such as poverty, education, exclusion, employment, gender equity, and access to social well-being and justice for all. This is annually marked on the 20th of February today with the objective to raise a voice against social injustice happening across the world. Ari Katz, education specialist at Boston Online Home Education, joins us now for further insights. Ari, good morning to you and thank you so much for joining us. Now, education is a key resource of change in South Africa. Quality education is essential to enabling learners to acquire the necessary skills, providing a gateway to higher learning and the workplace. What are some key areas which need to be addressed?
So good morning, Teko, and thank you for giving me the opportunity. I think to me, fundamentally, the most important issues that we need to address is first up, reading for meaning, and secondly, the basic mathematical skills of our learners. And if I look at the reading for meaning, what's very concerning to me is the fact that a study shows that only 22% of 10-year-olds are actually able to read for meaning. Now, we know that President Ramaphosa committed his administration to ensure that by 2030, all 10-year-olds will be able to read for meaning. However, on the current projections, only 36% will be able to read for meaning by 2030. So although that's better than 22% of the current situation, but it's still significantly far off the mark of where we should be. And of course, if learners cannot read for meaning, then they have no chance in actually getting a proper education and ultimately landing up being economically self-sufficient. That's first up. Second up is the fact that if we look at basic mathematical skills, the TIMS, which is the Trends in Mathematical and Science Study, shows that only 41% of grade 9 learners have basic mathematical skills and 36% of them have science competencies. So I think we're pretty far off where we should be, both in terms of reading for meaning and fundamental mathematical skills, which are going to be critical to learners who want to actually land up being gainfully employed one day.
Now, we do know that, of course, the issue around reading for meaning does not necessarily mean that it is, the government's responsibility only. What more can parents do to ensure that their children are able to break out of these social injustices?
So I think it is fundamentally important that every home encourage their kids to actually read as much as they possibly can. And quite frankly, the message I'd like to give parents is that it's not really important what your kids are reading, but more fundamentally, it's important that they develop a love for learning and a love for reading. So I think learners should be encouraged from a very young age to start reading as broadly and as widely as possible. And this should be a culture that's built into the home as well into school environments, etc. And we should definitely do a lot more to encourage parents, to encourage learners to actually enjoy reading and read broadly and widely, both to improve their knowledge and as well as to improve their understanding of so we develop reading for meaning.
What is then the long-term impact of these low early grade outcomes that you have highlighted?
So we know that the General Household Survey found that only 68% of youths completes grade 11 and only 52% completes grade 12. So although there are various obstacles like poverty, family responsibility, etc., that contribute to dropping out of school, research shows that early learning outcomes in the early grades are strong predictors of success in matric and actually passing matric. And to me, it's absolutely tragic that 50% of the kids who are going into grade 1 today will probably only land up getting to matric. And we're losing the other 50%. And that is absolutely tragic.
I mean, that is tragic to lose such a huge percentage of learners that aren't able to even get into matric. But there's also the issues around, of them being able to also get into TVET colleges. Do you think that kind of information is given for them to be able to get into other means of education instead of staying within the basic education sector?
So I think the issue of, there are two issues really that you're really talking about there. One is access in terms of entry, and the other one is throughput. In other words, those who start to actually finish their qualification, whether it be at a TVET college, at a regular college, at a university, irrespective. And I think they're two separate issues. Let's just deal with the second one first. What worries me about the throughput rates is the low throughput rates that we have in South Africa. So it's been reported that only 22% of learners who actually enter into tertiary education of one form or another finish their actually education in the minimum time frame. And to me, that is a real waste of resources on the one hand, from an economic point of view, but much more importantly, from a social point of view. What's disturbing is the fact of how many learners are able to gain access, but then just don't have the basic skills and support to get through the entire qualification. So I think we need to look at two things. We need to look at, number one, are the entry requirements and the foundations that we're building of those learners to enter the institution in the first place, are they appropriate? Are they reliable predictors of success? I know, for example, that Cambridge, for example, did a study on the Cambridge IGCSE and A-levels, and they found that there was a 72% correlation between learners who managed to pass IGCSE and their subsequent success at SATs and at college and university. Now, that's a strong predictor. So, number one, we have to examine, is the education that we're giving our learners at school strong enough foundation to enable them to actually, number one, enter tertiary education, but actually, more importantly, are they able to succeed in tertiary education? Because there's no point in letting them in and then actually not getting to the end of the finishing line, because that just creates frustration, disappointment, which obviously has got its own consequences.
Now, Ari, you speak about the issue, of course, of, how they can actually get access to these. But we know that results from pre-COVID international tests expose the systematic issues in education, with South African learners' results substantially below the standard of global students at the same levels. Can you just briefly give us some insights on that?
Yeah, so the reality is that the TIMS study, which is the Trends in International Maths and Science Study, which is really an assessment of maths and science knowledge of 4th and 8th graders around the world, we know that South Africa fared pretty badly, almost right at the end, right at the back of the queue. Now, we have to ask ourselves, why is that the case? Why do our learners perform so poorly in subjects like maths and science? And as I mentioned before, only 41% of grade 9 learners are able to do basic mathematical computations. Now, on the one hand, there has been a significant improvement, because in 2002, only 10%, 1 in 10 learners were able to perform mathematical calculations at that level. So we have improved from 10% to 41%, which is commendable. However, there's still a long way to go. And we have to ask ourselves, why? What can we do to actually redress this? And I think there are a number of things that we can do. So first up, the first thing that I would suggest is that we look fundamentally at our curriculum. Is it a rote learning curriculum, or is it a curriculum that challenges what we call higher order thinking, where you have to have reasoning and application, etc.? So that's number one, because the TIMS study, 2/3 of it is focused on higher order thinking. So number one, we have to relook at that. Then number two, I think where there is opportunity, and I think we're missing out, is that we live in the digital age. And so we should be encouraging and embracing digital technologies to actually, number one, identify gaps in learning. I mean, we have a tool where we're able to test the learner and identify what their gaps are in fundamental knowledge, and then you can use technology to actually teach and redress those individual gaps. So you create almost personalized learning, and then if the learner still needs help, you can actually, a teacher can intervene. But more than that, you can use technology today to do things like adaptive learning, where we start at the lowest level and we move the learner up according to their level. We can use technology to implement things like artificial intelligence, where we can do predictors of success. Is the student going to be in trouble? And we can use that to intervene. So I think there's so much technology out there, and to me, I think we're losing an opportunity both for learners and for teachers to actually embrace and the utilization of these learning and teaching methodologies and technologies within the classroom environment.
Ari Katz?
I'll just tell you one last thing on that, which is also critical. There was a study that was done across 3 universities of B.Ed, that's Bachelor of Education students. Now, these students are going to graduate to be teachers. They gave them a primary school test, mathematical test. And these future teachers, these prospective teachers, were only able to get 54% themselves in a primary school mathematics test. Now, if they're only able to get 54% themselves for a primary school maths test, how do you expect them to actually impart that knowledge on the future learners?
Ari Katz, Education Specialist at Boston Online Home Education. Thank you so much for your time this morning.